We left you at the end of part one, kayaking on beautiful Alturas Lake. We'd planned on several more paddle trips on mountain lakes while in the Sawtooths, but it wasn't to be. Our work schedules didn't always coincide, so on one of my days off I decided to hike on Iron Creek Trail while Chari worked. Probably the best day trip we took was to drive up to the top of Railroad Ridge in the heart of the White Cloud Mountains. It was a very pleasant drive on Highway 75 along the Salmon River to the East Fork of the Salmon, which we followed to Big Boulder Creek. Then we started climbing on Big Boulder Creek Road as far as the abandoned Livingston Mine, where we turned off to follow the Jim Creek Road. And on up to the top, the highest drivable road in Idaho. While driving on Big Boulder Creek Road, we saw an arch. We're sure it has a name, but we sure couldn't find it anyplace. We turned on to Jim Creek Road. At 9,300 feet, we found the Livingston Mine, active from 1902 until 1954. Primarily, they mined lead, silver, and zinc, with some gold and copper. There were traces of antimony and cadmium. The road got narrower and rougher, but the scenery was getting better. We came to a spot where we could pull off the road and walk down to Jim Creek. During our training, we'd heard about some of the endangered species in the Sawtooth, among them the whitebark pine. We'd passed through a grove of aspen trees, and I was continuing to drive, not really paying attention, I guess not really seeing the forest for the trees, when it occurred to me that these trees with white bark weren't aspens. These were pines. When we stopped and looked around, we found ourselves in a grove of very healthy looking white bark pines. Up on the ridge, we crossed the 10,000-foot line. We'd eventually reach 10,365. The views of the White Clouds and the Sawtooth Mountains in the distance were spectacular. We had the feeling of being on the top of the world and could see forever. The tundra-like meadow was full of colorful wildflowers. Sage was growing, obviously some years old as the trunk was gnarly, but no more than ankle high. The name Railroad Ridge came from an old tramway associated with the Livingston Mine. We reluctantly began to drive back down. Since we had a four-wheel drive truck, we talked about possibly taking some of the interns up here. You wouldn't have had to twist our arms to come back. Sadly, this wouldn't happen. July 4th was a hoot. We have no idea how this tradition got started, but tradition it is. Half the town will be in the parade, some in ATVs, some like us in the back of a pickup truck, some in anything on wheels. The other half the town lines the streets with buckets of water, super soaker water guns, garden hoses, etc., 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 and blast the participants. The participants of the parade retaliate by blasting the spectators and occasionally throwing out candy. We used our truck. I was driving, so was able to keep my window rolled up. Not so the folks in the back. Only in small town America. We decided to take a trip on our time off and go to Boise to add to our list of state capital tours and to see some of the Bosque Museum, and the 3 hour drive to get there promised to be beautiful. Emile Grangin was supervisor of the Sawtooth National Forest from 1905 to 1922. A 6 mile long dirt road leads to the unincorporated community named for him. We took a side trip down that dirt road along the South Fork of the Payette River to the community, which consists of a campground, the Sawtooth Lodge, and some tubs to soak in the water from the hot springs. We'd return later, but that story comes later. Chari had made a reservation for 2 nights at an Airbnb in Boise. Why the only picture she took was of my foot, I have no idea. We went for a tour of the Idaho State Capitol. This makes the 20th capitol we've seen and toured. There's a large Bosque population in Idaho, especially in the Boise area, spurred on by the need for sheep herders in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and again after World War II. Ernest Hemingway was a great friend to the Bosques, and we read about how, while in Cuba during the war, he and some friends from the Bosque community would take out his fishing boat on the lookout for German submarines and report their locations to the U.S. Navy. After touring the museum, we had a delicious lunch at a Basque restaurant right across the street. Hemingway spent his last years living in Sun Valley and is buried in Ketchum. On July 11th, I was off, but Sherry was working at the Redfish Lake Visitor Center. That afternoon, as I was driving over to pick her up, I saw some smoke from a fire not too far away, over towards the Bench Lakes. Sherry and the folks at the visitor center had been watching it. On that first day, a helicopter scooping up water from one of the Bench Lakes went down. The pilot was able to swim to shore, where he was met by firefighters who helped him hike to a waiting ambulance. He was not seriously injured. There had been no lightning storm that day, and we all suspected the fire was human-caused, which was later confirmed. By July 13th, at the end of the workday, we, Sherry and I, and the interns, were told that the fire was spreading rapidly and could turn in our direction. We should be ready to leave on short notice. For interns living in the bunkhouse, this meant packing up their suitcases and keeping them handy. For us, living in our RV that we'd set up to live in for the season, it wasn't quite as simple. We'd had a screened gazebo set up, with tables and chairs with our computers, where I'd been working on making videos and Sherry on her artwork. We had a propane fire pit, outdoor furniture, etc., all needing to be packed away. And inside, dishes, countertop oven, and coffee pot and such all had to be secured. We spent more than 4 hours packing up before we took a break for supper, and realized we couldn't live like this, with everything packed away, for possibly a week or two, waiting for the word to go. We made the decision to leave, and the next morning we told Lynn and Alicia. They weren't too happy, but were understanding. That afternoon, we pulled out. Sherry was able to get an RV site for a few days at Grand Jean, across the mountains from the Stanley Ranger Station, only about 12 miles, as the raven flies, but an hour by road. We'd have 4 days there to regroup and come up with a plan. The fire continued to spread. By the 24th, it had reached the shore of Redfish and was threatening the visitors complex. The marina, the lodge, and the visitor center were all closed. Sprinklers were running, trying to keep them safe. The beautiful trail we'd hiked, Fishhook Creek, was burned. Over at Grand Jean, we were trying to come up with a plan, and we got 2 job offers. First, friends Doyle and Paula, working at Grand Portage, where we'd met them several years ago, told us we'd be welcome there. And we received an email from the rangers at Bonneville Dam, where we'd been the previous 2 years, that they could use us. We chose Bonneville and told them we could start on August 1st. We left Grand Jean on July 18th. On the 24th, a lightning strike hit about 2 miles to the southwest. This fire, called the Wapiti Fire, quickly spread, and at this writing on September 2nd, is 0% contained and is now at 108,000 acres. It's threatening the towns of Stanley and Lower Stanley, with a major effort, so far successful, of creating fire lines to protect structures. Almost 1,500 personnel are involved in what has become the #1 priority fire in the nation. Lower Stanley had been evacuated, but folks are now back, but ready to move out again if needed. Meanwhile, by July 30th, the Bench Lake fire, having burned 2,600 acres, was in mop-up mode, and facilities at the Redfish complex were opening for visitors. On our way to Bonneville, we stopped at the National Oregon Trail Museum in Baker City, Oregon.